Phillips, but to expect him to kind of carry all of the, all of the load that Kyle Williams left by retiring is probably a little bit wishful thinking. So I think the defensive line is an area where I would expect them to still, probably entertain some moves either late in free agency or via a trade, and then could be a focus in the draft because there's a lot of talent there, and it makes sense, for them to take a guy where the value says they should.
We're talking with Matt Fairburn of theathletic.com and also of Bill's Beat podcast. You mentioned Kyle Williams. I was a huge Kyle Williams fan. Again, being a Rochester, New York native, you love that gritty blue-collar guy. His retirement was kind of unexpected, but the greeting he got at the end of the season and, of course, his epic reception at the last game. Can you give just a little bit of clarity or a little bit of your opinion on Kyle Williams and that whole process as his career finished up?
Yeah, it was a pretty unique weekend. I think it was nice to see him get the proper send off because he's not. He mentioned he would have been the first guy to just walk in on Monday morning after the season, tell Sean McDermott he's retiring, and walk out the door without all of the attention because. Like you mentioned, that his style was to just do the work and stay out of the spotlight and not crave the attention. And so to see him get, that type of reaction and to be able to play his final game on his terms and to know it's your final game. A lot of guys, the majority of the guys that retire from the NFL do so either not by choice or not knowing that they've played their final game when they walk onto the field because either nobody wants them at the end of the year or they get injured and aren't able to come back. There's a variety of reasons why guys, end their careers, and a lot of them aren't positive, but Kyle Williams was able to do it on his terms, and he was able to get the proper goodbye from the fan base that a guy like Eric Wood never got, and probably Eric Wood deserved it, and so when you see what happened to Eric Wood happen, and then you see the way Kyle Williams gets that send-off, it was definitely cool to see. It's a guy who meant a lot to the team, obviously, but I think he also meant a lot to the community and was arguably the best player during those drought years. So the fact that he got his playoff berth, and got to celebrate that and play a postseason game, and then even got to play in the Pro Bowl one final time, down in Orlando before truly hanging him up. And I saw he's making quite a little amateur golf career for himself already. He's a well-rounded athlete, Kyle Williams. So I'm sure we haven't seen the last of him. I'm sure he'll be up in Buffalo and stay, around the organization, stay visible, and spending a lot of time with his family. So all good things for him, and it was a pretty cool weekend, to witness. I'm
going to miss him a lot, watching him on Sundays and Mondays, and I wish him the best in his amateur golf career. It's kind of funny picturing that big fella lugging around a 7-iron, but I'm sure he does it well.
He is good, man. He is a really good golfer. You would be surprised. He was constantly talked about as the best athlete on the team in terms of a guy that can do a lot of different things. Like he can swim really well. He can play a lot of different sports really well, and golf is one of his best. I'm curious to see. He might be pretty damn good now that he can commit himself to it and play a lot. He was the best golfer on the team for sure.
Well, I'm sure if he does something great with golf, you'll be covering him for the athletic.com as well. So we're talking to Matthew Fairburn. I know you have to get out of here, so just another quick question, if you don't mind. And this one's on Jim Kelly, which growing up, Jim Kelly was my hero as a Buffalo Bills fan and many others. And he continues to be a hero for all, given his battles with cancer and, of course, the tragedy that befell his son a while ago now. You did a great article on him and his journey through the USFL. Can you just take a couple minutes to tell me what you learned about that most surprised you, and how did Jim's experience in Houston prepare him for Buffalo?
Yeah, that was a really fun story to write. Honestly, I enjoyed that story as much as almost anyone I've done since I started covering the Bills. I went into it with the idea that Josh Allen is in between years 1 and 2 of his pro career, and, kind of getting an idea of what the keys are to make a big jump between year 1 and 2. And when I look back at Jim Kelly, it's like, oh yeah, he spent the first couple of years in the USFL. And then you just start making some phone calls on it, and talking to people. I read Jeff Pearlman's book on the USFL, Football for a Buck, which I suggest anybody, if they haven't read it, very entertaining book. Jeff Pearlman is one of the best at writing sports books right now. I'd pick up, if you ever see a Jeff Pearlman book in the bookstore, I recommend picking it up because I'm sure it's good. But I read his book, and there was a little bit of Jim Kelly stuff in there, and so it kind of, got my interest going in the USFL and in Jim Kelly's time in the USFL. But I think what surprised me in reporting the story is how big a part of the story Mouse Davis became, and the offense that he played in. This offense that Mouse Davis designed with 4 wide receivers and this quick strike spread attack, nobody had ever seen it before. I mean, in 1968, Mouse Davis was using 4 wide receivers, and finally, he brings it to the USFL, and it becomes a big thing. But Jim Kelly didn't like the offense at first, and they had to kind of, persuade him to, buy into this offense. And once he did, he was breaking records left and right. And so, the chain of events is what fascinated me the most. He turns down Buffalo, which, obviously kind of makes him a little bit, at the time, almost a villain in the eyes of Bills fans, even though they know there's a chance he could be back. But if he doesn't say no to Buffalo, he doesn't go down to Houston, he doesn't cross paths with Mouse Davis, and if he doesn't buy into that offense, then, and it doesn't work so well for him, he wouldn't bring parts of that offense to Buffalo. And, if he doesn't do that, then it probably doesn't spread as quickly throughout the NFL. Now everybody is using a variation of Mouse Davis's offense, and it's one that requires a lot of thinking from the quarterback, which wasn't the case for Jim Kelly in college. So I don't think he would have been nearly as prepared to play as a rookie in Buffalo as he was after 2 years playing for the Gamblers and Mouse Davis. I think it was the best preparation he could have asked for. And it was a fun story to write because, a lot of those guys have some cool memories. I was able to talk to Mouse Davis and June Jones, two football gurus, sort of innovators in sort of offensive scheme and things like that. So it started off one way, the story, and it took me down a different path, but it was one that I enjoyed as a bit of a football history nerd and a guy that enjoys hearing about sort of the evolution of schemes over time. It was interesting to hear those guys talk football.
Well, you said it was one of your most fun to write, and I have to say, as a Jim Kelly fan who thought of the USL as kind of a footnote, it really did illustrate to me now that I'm older and more into the game as, how the game actually works. You're right, just the integration of the offense and how Jim Kelly brought that to Buffalo, and now so many teams use that high-powered, high-tempo style of offense. So it was a great read as well. So great. I know you have to get out of here, so I will let you go real quick, but I have to ask, the Buffalo Bulls, how far are they going to go in March Madness? I know you've got to be excited about them as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I jumped in last week to cover a game, and I hadn't. It was the first UB game I've been to since I moved here, so I kind of got a little bit of a crash course on the history of the program. And it's funny to think just how far they've come. And I think this team, seeing how they took care of business today in the first round of the MAC tournament, they look like a team that's ready to make some noise. I hesitate to say it would be a disappointment if they didn't, win a game or get to the Sweet 16. But I do think in their minds, the Sweet 16 is probably the expectation. The way that they've made strides each and every year, this class is the best in school history. They're playing great at the right time. They're healthy. I really think, a lot depends on where they're seated and which region they end up in. But I think it's okay to expect the Sweet 16. I think it's a fair expectation for these guys, and certainly it'll be fun to watch. And the women, if they keep running through the MAC tournament the way they are, they could be playing in the tournament again as well. So certainly a good time to be a college hoops fan in Western New York.
We are based in Akron, Ohio, so not everybody here was happy with that game, but I certainly was, and I kept it to myself. Thank you so much for your time, Matt. Matt Fairburn of theathletic.com. Please get out and read him. Thank you for all your thoughts on the Bills and then the Buffalo Bulls. Have a great evening. We really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
That was Matthew Fairburn of theathletic.com. And again, please get out there and read him. Theathletic.com is really a great place for long-form journalism that we used to read a lot more in newspapers and maybe Sports Illustrated, but now the internet and Twitter has taken over in the microwave society that we live in. But if you really do want to see some in-depth analysis, please go to theathletic.com, give Matt Fairburn a read, and also follow him on Twitter at Matthew Fairburn. That's Fairburn. Okay, we will be right back. I will have my thoughts on those Buffalo Bills and the Cleveland Browns, Super Bowl champions, right? We'll see. But that and much more as Cinder Block Sports continues. I am your host, John O'Donnell, and we will be right back.
Cinder Block Sports isn't your weekly recap. It's about host John O'Donnell's view on the week in sports, including interviews with interesting personalities, John's opinions on topics that you may have missed, and entertainment through analysis of the sports we love. Now, from the Dream Big Studios, here's John O'Donnell.
And welcome back to Cinder Block Sports. I am your host, John O'Donnell. I want to thank Matt Fairburn of theathletic.com and at Matthew Fairburn on Twitter. He is an excellent read on both platforms, and I encourage you to get out there and read more of him if you have not read him in the past. So lots of good thoughts on Buffalo, the Bills, and the Bulls as he becomes a Buffalo Bulls fan. I mentioned before that Cinderellas are out there. The Buffalo Bulls are a good team. They've been real good all year. We'll see what they do in the NCAA tournament. I think the Sweet 16 is probably their ceiling. But again, who would have thought that Loyola of Chicago would get all the way to the Final Four? So lots of interesting things with the Bulls. But let's jump into the NFL free agency and talk a little bit about what Matt had to say, but really dive deeper into what Cleveland did. The meat of the NFL free agency period is over for the most part. A number of bigger names with less recent birthdays are still out there, and they'll probably be scooped up by contenders trying to scare up some magic one last time on the way to a championship. To me, the two most interesting players still out there are Ndamukong Suh and Eric Berry. Suh has been sliding a bit in the area of productivity, but he'd be a great rotational piece on any defensive line that might have aspirations of being really, really good. For example, maybe the Broncos, maybe the Browns. I do think he's a cultural problem on some teams. For example, Buffalo. Buffalo does need a bridge from the Kyle Williams era to whatever they do at defensive tackle in the future. But I don't think Suh's a good fit in that locker room. McDermott and Bean, the coach and general manager of the Bills, are big on culture, and Suh can be a bit of a headache, although he's toned it down. I just don't see him as a fit. Eric Berry, he seems to be a harder fit overall for a team. He is an amazing story. If you don't know, he has survived cancer. He has survived major injury. This guy is one of the most talented players that's probably ever played safety in the NFL, and he just keeps coming back and keeps being productive. But he's on the other side of 30, and it'll be interesting to see who takes a chance on him. I like him in Cleveland a lot. I even like him in Pittsburgh. Somewhere where a playoff run isn't out of the picture, where it's possible, but he doesn't have to be a number one safety, and he won't be. He's injury prone. But one last run and maybe sneaking into the playoffs in a division like a weak AFC North. The Patriots could be an option. The Patriots have been very quiet. That's typical. Bill Belichick usually waits, and they make their moves closer to the draft, or they make draft day trades with the thought that they can draft for the long term and fill in the holes in the cheap. This is what they do. Speaking of price and cheap, there's a lot of discounts and premiums that get paid this time of year. There's the built-in premiums, like the franchise tag.